This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
There is quite a large number of philosophic works and theories on the connection between the human will and the intellect and their collaboration. Some philosophers sincerely believe that everything is either presupposed by nature and higher laws or is implemented in the human consciousness and controlled by people. Rene Descartes is one of the main ideologists of free will and the error inclination of the human intellectual knowledge, and his central idea penetrating all the aspects of his philosophic views is that human error is produced by the intellect when will is a broader and clearer notion. The differentiation between the will and the intellect has been a subject of various arguments and theories throughout the whole story of philosophy as fundamental knowledge. The primary matter of concern is whether the two notions are equal or whether any of them tend to be broader. Rene Descartes, in his theories, goes much deeper than simply opposing the will to the intellect, dividing a human being into the possible bearer of two different ways of thinking, the perceptive and the determined one. Here, seemingly, grasping the information from the imagination and acquiring any kind of worldview is opposed to the power of will, which lets a human being feel emotions, doubt, and denial. It is also noteworthy that Descartes connects both notions to that of human error and its origins, which consists of the person's natural capability of being disillusioned. In connection with the above-mentioned facts, one of the main topics for Descartes is the understanding of whether people can produce an error based on their will or on their intellect. First of all, it is necessary to distinguish between Descartes' will and intellect, giving one of the notions a broader meaning. Thus, according to his theoretic conclusions, the notion of will is synonymous with the freedom of thought given by God to his children. The human will is free and powerful, it is not limited by anything, and everything in people is created after the image and likeness of the higher power. It is possible to suppose that Descartes sees the will as the perfect gift of God. At this very point, it is essential for Descartes to explain the origins of human error, as the will presented by the highest power cannot give an error. It is created for another purpose. As a matter of fact, Descartes also notes that the error itself can be produced by a human being due to a person being absolutely imperfect compared to God. He explains that people are only created by God, but they are not God himself. As for the intellect, one can avoid erring only if judgment is not included in the thinking process, as judging belongs to the will, not the intellect. However, it is rather essential to see how the error can be produced, according to Descartes. If we see the will and the intellect as God's gift, then it is impossible to imagine that any of the components can lead a human being to the wrong decisions or choices. Nevertheless, erring is clearly a natural human aspect, so it either comes from the will or from the intellect. Descartes states that human error arises from the different limit levels of the will and the intellect. The will is unlimited, while the intellect has certain borders and limitations. The fact is that, with the ability to perceive, the intellect can understand and grasp much, but free will gives a personality an opportunity to judge, trust, deny, and doubt anything, including the notions and options, that cannot be perceived and understood by the intellect. In simpler words, the intellect gives us an opportunity to perceive and understand some notion, but it cannot reflect a judgment on it. Thus, judgment is the will domain. When one needs to judge something understood by the intellect, he passes the notion to the will, which is to confirm or contradict the notion. The origin of human error comes out of the following misbalance. Being limited, the intellect passes any perceived concepts to the will for judgment, but the will does not admit there is anything beyond one's perception and understanding, and thus, it can confirm or contradict some things, which cannot be perceived by a human being, due to the limited intellect. Paraphrasing, human error is born when a human being tries to make a judgment on something he cannot perceive or fully understand. Descartes' rationalism is a phenomenon that is criticized and doubted even nowadays. The fact is that the philosopher under discussion admits only one doubtless truth, which consists in the existence of the mind and the intellect in a human being, giving much power to the inner experience of the personality compared to the outer world. All other universal truths and facts, according to Descartes, can be doubted and judged from the point of view of the will. He denies any possibility of the empiric kind of world perception, constructing a theory that the perception process can be held based only on abstract judgment and evaluation. Thus, Descartes also offers a solution for avoiding the human error factor. In his works, he states that it is necessary not to pass any kind of perception to the will for the judgment if one cannot clearly or fully understand this perception, or the perception can be judged from a different perspective. In this way, the will does not have to confirm or contradict the doubtful truth, and human error is avoided. When there is more than one way to perceive and understand the notion, there is seemingly more than one way to judge it. Thus, avoiding human error can be provided if the will has no choice and the perception subjected to a judgment is clear and distinct for the human being. In other words, though admitting the possibility of making a judgment about everything, Descartes offers a kind of careful judgment to avoid misperception. Overall, the theories produced by Descartes admit the complete coincidence and collaboration of the will and the intellect in forming the personality and the worldview. Nevertheless, Descartes also states that any human being is imperfect by nature and that human mistake is something natural for people. Moreover, the will being a broader notion gives a person an opportunity to make judgments on the perceptions produced and understood by the intellect, and human error can be avoided. The rationalist theory of Descartes gives quite a logical explanation for human mistakes and their avoidance. If the will does not have to judge anything that is not fully perceived or understood by the intellect, a human being does not err. If you want to find more works like this research paper on intellect and will in Descartes philosophy, head over to ivpanda.com. It has a collection of free samples with thousands of submissions covering virtually all academic subjects. No registration required to access it.